Hello, everybody. It is time for another Eden on Eos Chief Delegate meeting. Today is February 3rd. I don't know, what meeting is this now? 15?
16.
16. Sweet 16. Jesse, you can go first with updates if you'd like.
All right. Hey, guys. At the end of the month, we got all the data from our hives. So all the hives, we just started our 2.0 model in January, and they were all keeping track of every single work item. They put a value in EOS for that item, the link submitted, the transaction hash. And so we're coming out with a report next week. So now this is across all the hives. There were 8 funded hives in January. Across all the hives, 23.8% was spent on translations, 7.5% on articles, 18% on video, 2.6% on podcasts, 1.8% on graphic 2D, almost 20% on social media posts, 1.5% on an offline event. We just had one of those in the Vietnamese hive, 2.8% on miscellaneous tasks, and the business development task 5.5%. Social media posts and translations were the highest spent. The other thing I'll share is that we had a point system. And so congratulations to the Vietnamese hive. They won the contest. Second place was the French hive. Third place, Korean hive. Fourth place, Turkish hive, Spanish hive, English hive, Hindi hive. Look forward to our report coming out next month. Going to be a lot of cool stuff in there. Excited to kind of see feedback when that comes out.
Like, how many members do you have now as a part of your colony?
We have a little more than 150 right now.
That's wild. Good for you. I have been working on the same project for a while. That's going to be coming out soon with a full. So it's officially going to be including an Eden process as part of its DAO membership to select basically the leadership and the committee that this DAO is going to use. It's tied to governance on EOS and block producers and kind of how that all works. So that should be it's really cool. It's coming together. I think 2 weeks or so. It'll be live and it'll be out there, so I can talk more about it. I've also been running the idea past the Telos Foundation on basically bringing this process and this community and the structure over to the Telos ecosystem. And so we'll see what that looks like. It's obviously going to be a long process, but they're open to it. Maybe in that community, what I think will be useful, will be interesting, is we can be a little more deliberate. In this case, we can kind of start it off from ground zero with a really pointed and deliberate purpose. So I think that's pretty exciting. I know there's still a bit of tribalism amongst these communities, but I think that's slowly going away. And we're recognizing that we're stronger together. And those who are in Eden, because they love this idea of how it's democracy done differently, should be hopefully pretty excited about that we get another iteration. Anyway, it's a long way to go. I still have to get people and try to do a worker proposal and get funding and blah, blah, blah. But at least there's some pretty good openness to this process to bring it over. So, okay, yeah, this is interestingly. I had a conversation with I don't know, should I say his name? I don't want to say his name. Anyway, he's a guy in the community. He does some charity work, and so I'm going to help him with a bit of a kind of white paper on doing a manual election. We talked about this before, but doing like basically a donation to a community. The community runs their own internal deck of cards election, and whoever comes out of the top gets the money to deploy it within their community. So it's that whole philanthropic approach to using this process. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's on my list to do for next week.
Totally. Like something like that's such a cool outcome, I think, even if it has nothing to do with EOS necessarily. I mean, we could like make a breadcrumb trail back to EOS, but
this does, because it's in Venezuela, so it actually is totally tied
cool
to them and their use of EOS's currency. Randall?
For EOS support, we were interviewed by Bywire. So those who did not see it, check it out.
He really hit you with the tough questions there.
Yeah.
Those are some interesting questions he asked you.
You did great.
I thought I was being interviewed to be the president of the United States. That was good. And the second thing is, we've been working very hard to start recruiting and to educate and to get people ready to help the network in a meaningful way. Development is also going on so that we can really make EOS support a true DAO or DAC in the future. So we are really building the platform. And also, I think I came into agreement with Jesse on how much we will take for our next development, the collaboration that Support and the Bees are working on, how much we will take after Palmello is completed, and then we will deliver on the referral system that will help with a way to hold the Bees accountable and to also give them something for their work, right? So in my head, I'm just thinking that the Bees are going to end up becoming like influencers, right? And they will just do their thing and they will get rewarded. And lastly, I think I've been working aggressively with the ENF, but that's something that the ENF can talk about if deemed necessary.
Okay, cool. Lovejoy.
Hey guys. Yeah, deep in ENF world. That's been keeping me really busy. Apart from that, we've been having some, I think, interesting discussions in the community, which I think we'll touch on a little bit more later in this conversation about the shape of things going forward. Yeah, I'm still recovering. Just my cough won't go away, so I'm going to stay muted most of the time.
Okay, cool. John.
Yeah, Fractally, it's taken majority of my focus. We're looking at the sort of token contract and the possibility of how that might be able to be updated and good little features out of that and the broader scope of things.
Is Violet Garden gonna be still its own thing? Will that still exist, or will that be sort of rolled up into Fractally and kind of go away?
Yeah, I think it will probably do some sort of merge. It's not finalized, but that's probably the way to do it.
Aaron, you're last.
Yep, I will try to keep this short. I'm fighting a headache, so I don't know how coherent I'll be. But account creation stuff's still underway. I feel like I say that every week. It's the concepts that we've actually learned from doing this process through Eden and whatever we think we can both apply to some of the stuff in the working group papers, which I'm going to be excited to kind of talk about. So on that side, the account creation may lead into some cool stuff, proposals that'll come out to even further extend what we had talked about. And on the flip side, like you were talking about earlier, Chris, the application of Eden processes to other things. I can think of a couple things in some of these papers that might be able to benefit from Eden processes. Like the paper will define a thing where it's like some sort of community leadership needs to exist. We don't know what it is. That's certainly going to be a point to, like, if that idea is warranted and we want this on the network, then we'll get into the details about governance, and being able to reapply these systems is certainly going to be a big win and use case for potentially what we have here. So I don't have too many updates. It's mostly paperwork, working group paperwork. I'm excited that the API paper's in like review right now. Translation will hopefully begin soon. That'll be coming out in a couple weeks, and the wallet paper will be entering review. And then once that's done, I can stop writing every day and I will be a more sane human, maybe. I don't know, but that's my update.
You're going to disappear, right? Because you're going to deserve a break after all this?
I am going to take a break after this. I've been working nonstop since like November at this point. So
yeah, well-deserved break for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Great updates. So the next item on the agenda was to review basically bylaws. And the idea is this come up a bit in the community, Eden not having really formalized bylaw drafts, essentially, and some misunderstandings of expectations. We're basically kind of waiting, kind of falling into the B1 trap where we're kind of waiting for someone else to do something.
yeah.
So we're gonna go back to the principles of more equal animals and try to be as independent as possible, which means that there's no harm in us trying to at least come up with a framework or a start at bylaws. And if they don't go anywhere, that's fine. But as mentioned by Aaron and myself, there's other communities that are going to use what we're starting here and adopt it into their own community. So at a minimum, maybe some of these bylaws could at least be a template and useful for those.
Before we get to sort of nitty gritty, like the point of Eden, like the sort of overall goal is it to essentially hand out community funds and help the community making EOS a better place, or is it to expand the community's power when it comes to governance?
Like, I don't think it's an either or. There's probably a bunch of options. Those are two of them.
Yeah. Well, What is the answer to that then?
It could, well, we could have, like, if it's a multiple choice question, that could be A and B. C could be, are we going just expanding our own membership and creating a community that works together for our own self-interest? D could be, are we a community that's looking to expand into other ecosystems? Are we going to we could buy some land and start a commune? We could, I mean, I don't know. It seems like there's a lot we could do, is sort of my point.
Yeah. So which one is it that, you know, Eden is about?
I don't know. I don't think we need
I don't think it's like relevant to pick one. It's just useful to think about these things. You know, Dan had said that there's a possibility of staying independent, and also, like, we don't know about Fractally yet. The white paper still hasn't come out as of this recording. Yeah, it's still like a lot of unknown, but just interesting to kind of think about, I think.
Well, ironically, that's like the first point on this whole bylaw sheet, is the purpose of the foundation and organization. And so far, we don't have an answer included in the peace treaty, nor our own. So, and I'm not saying right now, the goal, by the way, isn't to like, hey guys, let's answer all this. I just want to show this to us, and we can, are we missing some key items? And then I think we could take it away and individually, like I'm happy to start to plug in some potential answers just because I'm doing it anyway. But yeah, the goal is just to look at this, not to answer it.
So Chris, if you see the other tab, there's a flow charts that Chris created, and he had a proposal of how.
Sure, that's a great segue. There we go. So here's what EOS looks like currently in a snapshot. Can you guys see that, or is it showing the wrong thing?
Yeah, I can see it.
We can see it.
Okay. So this first of all could be wrong. I'm only going off of what I know, and I don't know everything. So by all means, correct anything that you think jumps out. So I'll just quickly run through this to sort of explain it. Token holders, purple is like influence, essentially. Green is money. So token holders vote for block producers, stake weighted vote. Block producers set inflation. Here's the money coming into the system. 1% BP pay, 2% savings. Block producers do have the ability to perform God powers, and they can self-police. This isn't, I was trying to look at the differences between Telos and EOS in terms of how it's set up, because it's such a good apples to apples comparison. So there is self-policing by block producers possible, but it's not really explicitly written in some sort of overarching document that I have found yet. So then if we go down, we've got the Eos Network Foundation. The block producers have appointed leadership there. They provide funding based on the request for funding. There is, Aaron corrected I misunderstood or kind of forgot about the EOS Foundation Advisory Board. We barely ever hear about that. But there was in one of the very first document that came out from the ENF, there's an advisory board. So how they were selected, I think it's more of an appointment as well by key stakeholders, it looks like. So they provide oversight and advice, and they advise the Eos Network Foundation. Then we've got us over here, Eden. We have been funded by the Eos Network Foundation. We give funding to chief delegates, and we elect prudent stewards of community funds. I think it's a pretty general statement of what we're doing. And then the ENF also does Pomelo via matching. So to token holders, working groups, they appoint and fund. ENF Ventures, just looking forward, like that's on the roadmap. So I just figured I'd throw it in here. Likely to fund that plus a point. And then they do marketing as one of the big buckets on their quarterly report was marketing, essentially, brand development type of thing. So funding and appointing. Okay, so that's the current snapshot. Now here is a suggested, how could Eden be included in all that? So a little more busy. Token holders, same thing. They vote for block producers. Block producers set inflation. I just threw this here for kicks, but slightly reducing BP pay, slight reducing amount of savings, and adding some directs just for fun. Before it, so they can still self-police, but you notice the God powers are gone. I've suggested that the Eden community could have tied in much more closely with the block producers. So a relationship is formed where we can request funding directly from the block producers, because that has been suggested and encouraged. The Eden election, this is small, but I'll read it. Eden's elections select salaried leaders. So we would all have like a small salary to have these roles, who deliberately direct our combined portion of funding. So instead of us having these individual budgets and we just do our own thing, we would have a salary and a combined budget that as a committee, might be a little slower, but as a committee, we would then direct funding to whatever cause that we would kind of decide to spend funding on. So it would almost select for leaders as opposed to projects in that respect. And then they would also, they would select leaders, they become the delegates. The chief delegates, anytime God powers are requested, they go through us. We would have like a single MSIG that could be basically a funnel to pass through God powers. And it doesn't have to be all God powers. Like technical breaks could be one thing, but stuff that's more like just, for example, inflation or things that are deliberated and community has back and forth dialogue, that could then filter through us as like this community checkpoint. We would also then appoint the executive director of the Eos Network Foundation as opposed to the block producers directly. And then this advisory board would have a collaborative relationship with the Eden chief delegates, because we now have this sort of shared increased responsibility with managing the network, who still advise the Network Foundation, and the stuff at the bottom is the same. So in this layout, Eden and the chief delegates have far more influence as to the direction of the chain. So there's one example. Thoughts?
I think the God powers piece should still be next to the block producers, because like no matter what kind of governance structure that we have in place, it's, you know, he who runs the chain is gonna be, you know, God of it kind of thing.
Does it have to be that like that?
Yeah, I agree with John.
By definition.
No, I'm saying
almost.
like technically speaking, does it have to be like that?
The nodes could potentially, if you had enough nodes, just ignore your requests and stuff like that. Like, you know, it's like in most cases, like, you know, we can delegate that power. Sure, we can delegate that power, but I don't think we should ever be under the illusion that something cannot happen without, you know, whoever's in charge, whether it's the ENF or you know, Eden. Technically, it can still always happen. There's still that layer of trust there in the block producers, and, you know, who runs the network there as well.
Now, but what I don't get is if we have chief delegates or we have Eden members, right, and they are not the majority of the token holders, right, but they are having the God powers, then it's not fair to the people who actually has the most to lose if, let's say something was to happen to the network.
I think it's God powers is probably, it's just too broad. It's like, it's not like there's multiple aspects to those God powers. So I agree with you. Like, I think any technical issue that would come up, that's like, so you would have to kind of split out the God powers. And so maybe all Eden, we have input on inflation set points, or when the ENF is requesting funding, does that go through Eden to approve, or stuff with vesting, like the B1 thing. This community could have had input on that. So it's basically like an oversight committee that can manage governance decisions beyond emergency technical changes.
So basically we should just have a seat at the table, pretty much.
It's just one of the MSIGs. Yeah, it's not like it. So the BP still do everything they do, except now it's 15 of 21 plus Eden CDs.
Got
or some things. I don't know. It doesn't have to be everything, but it's just like, it could just be some stuff.
So again, back to my question before is, you know, one of the questions was, do we want to expand the governance powers of the community? So looking at this chart, that's what you want?
It's an option. Yeah, in general, I think so. Yeah, generally speaking, I think the stake-weighted Pareto capture of DPoS, it's just one form of Pareto it's just one. So if we can overlap things, so if we can add this other form of, you can't capture this now. The whole point of Eden is that you can't capture it with Pareto. It's Pareto resistant. It has all these benefits of democracy. So if we can overlap these two now, we create a more resistant system and a more robust system.
Yeah, perhaps we shouldn't go real deep in on this conversation, given that, you know, fractally white papers around the corner, and because like that would just, there'll be a whole lot more ideas thrown out and new methods of how we can decide, you know, governance, and then, you know, which parties do, you know, what and stuff like that. Because, you know, like it says, it's DAOs, like you can have more communities doing more things in different ways with different relationships and stuff. Yeah,
I agree. it'll be a much more robust discussion once we read the white paper.
It's tricky as well because it's like the chicken and egg problem. Like, it'd be cool if we had, you know, more governance influence over the chain, but then we can't prove our experience with governance issue over the chain without governing the chain as well. So, like, you know, the block producers won't be so keen on giving us too much power if, again, you know, we fail at handling it properly and stuff like that. And again, they're the ones that, you know, spent all the money to get that influence in the first place. So it's a big ask, sort of transferring that trust, some of it away anyway from Eve, and then putting it into Eden.
My question is, how do we elect the ENF person? How do we
So
elect that person?
the idea there was, yeah, I would imagine we'd all just, Eve would end up still being the guy. Like, so the thought was, we would seek candidates, people who would say, hey, I'd like to work and have that job. Eve would be one of them, and we would discuss and interview, and we would have an election basically and come to 2/3 + 1 ourselves to appoint whoever that is.
So that would be a problem. That would create a political system, a political party.
Well, normally that's how it works, though. So normally in organizations, you have a board. Like a board, they get to pick the CEO. Like that's normally how it works. What we're doing actually in EOS is actually abnormal in a traditional business sense, where if Eden, and the other thing to keep in mind is if this was the state of Eden, I'd expect a lot of other people who didn't participate in the first election would participate in this election. That's the other thing, right? If you knew that the end of the rainbow was people who actually were going to have true political influence in terms of deciding the direction of this chain, I expect we'd see a lot more people step up to try to participate is one thing.
Can I throw an idea out there?
Yeah.
One of the main roadblocks I see to this model as it stands is that Eden 1.0 is dominated by the English speaking community. And I think this brings us back to the need for a democracy of democracies. And so perhaps if Eden 1.0 multiplied by however many communities worldwide, each set of chief delegates from those respective organizations appointed a candidate to lead the ENF, and then all those candidates went into like a pool to be considered by like the entire, like a global consortium of, so you'd have more like a United Nations kind of like scale thing. Whereas unfortunately, I think the only thing we could hope to achieve right now, we would inevitably just, you know, put one of, it's like we've kind of already done what this would achieve in a sense. I know what you mean though, that it would expand the political power to like it would complete the loop. It would complete like the circuit almost of political power and the reason for elections. It would kind of give us a reason for being that we don't currently have. But I think in order for it to really be robust, it needs to be like a network almost. Like this needs to be one node in a giant network. Fractally, it's seeming a lot like Fractally is headed that way, and it's a bit like sociocracy. It's a bit like the way the Zapatista is organized, where you've got community councils that all send representatives to like a central body, and then they deliberate, and they send people back to the community to like relay what took place at that central deliberative body. And then they have this like reciprocal sort of spoken hub sort of relationship. And I feel like that's what we're headed towards with the fractal concept, but I haven't read the white paper, so I can't really say.
Me neither. But I think the concern with Fractally is that it seems to head to mass appeal. With a model like this that we're talking about Eden filling, mass appeal doesn't work. You need specific people to be a part of that, like are in Eden and being elected to be interested in this thing. Whereas if we took Eden and tried to just make everybody part of Eden, like it wouldn't be effective as an element of the system like we're looking at in the diagram. So I think that is potentially a really strong reason that both of these systems do need to continue to exist, is because I don't see how Fractally fits into this diagram at this moment. But I could see how in Eden of Edens, like was the original idea when we're talking about Chinese and Korean and like all these different language speakings, like creating a pyramid of Edens, that kind of fits into this diagram. But when it's everybody, when you're trying to get your local town into the system and you're like all these various groups that really don't care about EOS at all, if the leadership structure boils out of that, then it's going to be convoluted. It's no longer Eden on EOS, a process specific to EOS. It is now an app that everybody just wants to use to earn money and do other things.
Yeah.
So,
but don't you think there's kind of like, again, like I have no idea because I haven't read the white paper, but couldn't there be like kind of a level of opt-in-ness to, like, say we had a union of unions and we had fishermen over here and knitters over there and songwriters over there, and maybe some of them have no interest in governance, but they're all banded together and their fates are kind of tied together through like a common exchange medium, i.e. EOS. And certain members within those communities, if they reach a sufficient size, are going to be interested in the fate of the network or, you know, that stuff, governance and whatnot. And they could opt in, or they could say, hey, we should have a seat at the table. We're like a big community and the fate of this whole network kind of affects us. Like we ought to have a seat. And then they could opt in to participate in a greater sort of governance process. But I know what you mean. Like if it's just a bunch of, you know, small communities that don't amount to, yeah, I mean, if it's just like a real niche sort of like, I don't want to pick on any interest groups that might not be, but yeah.
no, I mean,
I see your point.
I'm trying to draw your analogy out further. And like, if there's fishermen and lumberjack and all these unions and or whatever, if they get to a certain side, do they deserve like political power in the government of the country that they're within? I don't think so. They might want to like lobby for things or whatever, but they don't get a seat at the table when bills are being drafted. For me,
Well,
like Eden feels like a process that is for governance and defining and power and structure and decision making. And the way that Fractally is going is now more of an economic and organizational engine, but it is no longer governance. I mean, I'm speaking
Maybe,
from a
we
lack
don't
of
know.
knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But from like what little hints I've heard, it's meant to be more mass appeal. It's meant to pull people in. It's meant to incentivize people to participate, which skews and misaligns interests. Like, I don't see how Fractally fits into a diagram like this. I think that if you are seeking funding for a project, you should go to Fractally, and Eden should probably start focusing more on governance. This model here has fixed salaries for the people to participate in the leadership. So that way they don't need their budget for their products. Like your goal of being a part of something like this, at least the way I'm interpreting it, is that you are an official acting in this new Pareto distribution. I don't know, it's all up in the air. I do think kind of coming all the way back before we went down this rabbit hole, like this system would be really hard to implement. Just because like it has to really prove itself. Like the Eden of Edens would have to exist and showing that it's effective to be able to gain the power, to be able to influence the change in the network this way and effectively move a little bit away from DPoS. And we're not going to be able to prove that that happens unless Eden iterates and grows on its own and is not replaced, which we need funding for and development for. And like, if we 100% were like, yeah, we want this Eden process to be a new like leg of governance, then like our entire budgets should all be going into ensuring that this system is developed, is expanded, is rolled out to the other communities, facilitates growth, like for those who are interested and wanted to participate. It would have to not be about our projects anymore because we lost our development team essentially.
In terms of pragmatically, in terms of this and the BPs accepting, bottom line, they would always have to approve because if say we somehow there's a code change that says inflation changes need to go through 15 to 21 plus an Eden CD MSIG, they could just undo that, right? 15 to 21 could be like, nah, we don't like who you've just elected. We're totally crossing that off. We're going back to how it is currently, right? They could always do that. So it's almost like a peace treaty would exist between the BPs and this Eden, where it's like, we're just going to do a gentleman's handshake. They're going to make the change so that now we have authority, but they could always undo it if they so felt. Does that sound accurate?
I think that's the only way to technically do it now, is it would just have to be an agreement that this was a process, because at the system level, block producers, once they reach quorum, can do whatever they want to do. The technical solving that at a technical level would be a big undertaking. That would require a lot of hours to rework how EOS.io works to actually add that check and balance at the system level. So a friendly agreement that is in place, like a lot of what Telos does, is just, it is the agreement. It's not codified into the system contract. This is an agreement that when you jump on, if this happens, like this is going to happen. And then that's just up to the people who are block producers to enforce. It's an agreement. That's not a smart contract.
Does the EOS Foundation Advisory Board have any influence, or are they simply just providing advice?
It's double-edged. We are providing advice, but you have to keep in mind that the board is also made up of block producers. So if the ENF goes way off script and starts doing crazy stuff, you have the block producers right there with knowledge that can just cut funding. And then the ENF doesn't have funding anymore. Funding could be cut off at any moment based on the advice of the advisory board.
So even, yeah. So it's like BP's on top on a technical level, and then it's delegated back down to the ENF, and then under the ENF is the advisory board, and then the advisory board still has BP influence there.
And I mean, arguably in that same structure, Eden kind of has representation there because I am on the board. So like if we talked about things.
I was going to say, would it be simpler if we just replaced the ENF advisory board with Eden itself, and then that's our gentleman's agreement, or
Potentially.
before actions are made by the ENF, they are run by Eden, and then Eden can just say yay or nay, regardless of what we say. It can still go, but it'll be on record as to what our thing is, and we would be given the opportunity before the opportunity to say yes or no to within 48 hours or whatever before it's actually triggered, approved by the ENF, and then approved by the block producers. But also, like, I can't comment on how it's done, but like, I don't see why Eden 1.0 should be considered to have more weight than a potential fractally based DAO. Just given the way, or just given the way that governance is structured on Fractally, I think it makes more sense, and there's better checks and balances in the Fractally system than what we have in Eden today, as well.
You have quite the insider knowledge, though. So
yeah, I know. Like it just means can't go too far down this rabbit hole again without reading the white paper.
I'm just glancing over rules of relative power and coupling and encapsulation here on Dan's book, More Equal Animals, and I'm like, it pretty much lays out kind of what Fractally might be organized like, if you think about it.
Well,
like the hold on, I gotta find my notes here again. The lesson we can take from this is that democracy only works among relatively independent equals and only at a small scale. If we want to build larger democratic systems, then they must be constructed to respect the law of relative power. It is possible for people to reach consensus within their county. This is coupling and encapsulation. And that consensus gives everyone in the county more power. Their county has far more power to negotiate with the state as a united front of 50,000 co-located people than if 50,000 uncoordinated people wanted to achieve the same influence. A democracy of states should know nothing about the composition of the states. From a computer science perspective, the fact that states are composed of counties and that counties are composed of towns, which are composed of people, is an implementation detail. At a federal level, the peace treaty is a democracy of states where each state is an equal. Each state is an equal. So I'm just thinking, yeah, we can't, like, you can't have like one DAC to rule them all. You kind of have to have a federation, or I don't know if federation is the right word, but a democracy of DACs that each has relative power in the system.
And each DAC has their own relationship with each other DAC as well. Like, it's a spider web of relationships. It's not so hierarchical all the time as well. And then, you know, all the complexities on that, and then that's what forms into Fractally. So
yeah, so that's the DeFi system, right? Like trading their own tokens. That's the web of the relationships, I think, that he's describing.
So the thing is, it's not about fractal systems, right? It's about the fact that you pay someone to join, or the person is actually volunteering or having a stake in the game. Because if we're paying people to just join the community, there's going to be a lot of people, and they don't have any incentives. They just join because they are getting money, and they will just join the community. But can you use that system to elect leaders who care enough? That's where the problem is. Those two things are the things that we have to factor into this if we are trying to elect leaders who care enough about the system that they will do whatever it takes to protect the system.
I don't quite understand how you guys arrived at the conclusion that in Fractally it would operate so differently from the way Eden now operates, where you still have your reputation on the line, you still are part of a small community that other people will judge you for your actions, and the further you go, and the more, you know, kind of you pay it forward with your contributions to the community that other people can verify, the further rounds you would get to in an election, and the more budget you would preside over for that week, I guess. And it seems like all the incentives are aligned. It doesn't seem like a money-making game to me, because if it was played like a money-making game, the people playing it that way, I think, would lose pretty quickly. It's funny to me that the guy that wrote, you know, like More Equal Animals, that goes into moral hazard and skin in the game and all this stuff,
yeah,
like,
right.
would omit,
would
like,
leave it out.
Oh, oops, like,
I don't think it's fruitful speculating on what it can or can't be, or what it's going to cover and what it's not going to cover, and how it's going to compare to ours and how it's not.
Let's just go back to this one thing as a high level, and then we can pretty much end, or we keep talking, of course, but just to complete this topic of these bylaws. I've shared this with the group. After this call, I'm going to share this with the Eden members. I'll share both those images plus this with everybody, because it was just people were talking about it, and I think some people can take this and start to fill out answers. What do they think? Like, what could, just leave this to anybody. Go ahead, fill it out. What do you think?
We should just quickly say that the law firm that was hired with the help of the ENF has created a memorandum analysis for us. They went through 4 different entity types that we could consider, the pros and cons of each. We will be discussing that in next week's call.
Well, here's one cool side effect that I think Chris alluded, which is, and you know, Chris is actively working on taking this structure that exists now and bringing it to other places, like both, as you alluded to, the work maybe with Telos, but then also on the ground, there's the what's the name of that organization again? That
it hasn't been disclosed yet.
Oh, okay.
But there's a DAO it's a controlled membership of 64 people. It's very different than ours, but it's use the process.
Even if we transition and go to you know, Fractally, and this is no more like as Eden per se, the model is pretty interesting and could be used outside of you know, because like Fractally kind of depends on a big system that has many, you know, is capable of federating all these different organizations all over the world. But say you had a group in a small town and you were cut off from the internet and you just wanted to organize, this is a cool way of doing it. So, you know, I think it's worthwhile, as much as I do kind of think we're going to end up moving to Fractally. I think it's still worthwhile figuring out what this is in its own right.
But April 9th, right? April 9th, what are we going to say to the new chief delegates who are coming?
what we're going to say to the next chief delegates is, here's the research. Like, if you guys want to form, I think the next chief delegates are going to be in a much better position to form an entity than us, because most of us have entered into other commitments that we cannot form an illegal entity. But this is for the next round.
Well,
But Chris, what you have is I think it's nice. It's very good, and maybe we should just just play around with it. Go from there. I mean, there's nothing wrong with us doing that. We're not losing anything.
Yep, that was the point. It's just discussion, and people can take it or leave it.
I don't know what's going to happen on the election April 9th. I'm slightly concerned that nobody's going to care and nobody's going to want to participate. Just being brutally honest, like, why would you want to go through this process if this process is going away and if this organization is going away? It's funding in the short term, which is great. It's going to be very different than I think what we tried to do. I don't think that I think if people run on April 9th, it's going to be to fund their individual projects, and they're not going to think twice about what Eden could do from a governance perspective, unless it turns out that Fractally just can't do it. But we don't know yet. So I guess that goes back to the organization. And it's like, we could put money into an organization and have it ready on April 9th. But with how quickly everything keeps changing, is that organization even going to be useful to them? Are they even going to try to do the things that we're trying to do?
Let's say you have DAOs, a bunch of DAOs, right? And each DAO has like one vote. So you are electing like a member from that DAO to represent that community. These DAOs can also have an election and elect, let's say, a consortium of chief delegates, right? But still, don't you need an organization for them to be in so that they can get funds and use those funds to do whatever they want to use it to do?
I feel like this is the question we've been asking since day one.
So no matter what, because they are going to be like the ENF. The ENF is technically also going to be a DAO. And that ENF has already created an organization where there's a way for you to spend the money, take the money, and redistribute that money. So if you have a bunch of guys who are going to be in an organization like we are right now, and they cannot transfer the money, then what the hell is the point?
Yeah, it's going to be up to every DAO to figure out. You're right. I think this problem doesn't go away anytime soon, no matter how you slice.
But we still need a non-profit organization to form so that you can work with the real world, or else it doesn't work.
Yeah. We see this happening with the EOSIO Plus group right now in those meetings, like just to talk about the need of an organization for these groups to come together to be able to do joint things and for people to be able to contribute to that organization. So yeah, there are needs, and by publishing this opinion type thing, we can determine or help people determine how they create those organizations. For us to create one at this point, we'd have to justify somehow. I mean, we're figuring out ways around not having a shared budget. We're at the end of, the last quarter of our term.
There's another question I have for John. You brought up a point that based on the DAO, right, then maybe the amount of representative is going to increase or decrease. Is that what you were alluding to? Like,
well, DAOs are a group of people, right? Not every person is equal. If it was a DAO full of, Aarons, then I would give it more weight than, another DAO where it's just fanboys or, something like that. Same thing with, language. Like, are you going to give the Chinese language the same weight as the Fijian language? Probably not.
Who is going to determine that? That's my question.
A lot of that will be answered in the Fractally white paper.
All right. Man, this white paper, man, I cannot wait for it.
Someone should open up that link that I put in the chat.
And then what, John? Is it going to download malware?
Or share the screen and let Chris narrate. Chris is good at narrating.
I'll read it.
Or we could just read it. Yeah.
Are you gonna show your screen, Chris?
I recently acquired 80,000 ETH for a very, very good price, and now I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Any help? Sorry, going to read it? I haven't read it yet.
Yeah,
read it.
Yesterday, I was doing some good old arbitrage trading between Solana and Ethereum, and I managed to get my hands on 80,000 ETH for a really low price. So low, in fact, that you wouldn't believe me if I told you how I pulled off this deal. Now, I don't know what to do with all this ETH. It's worth approximately $250 million USD, which is not bad if you ask me. Should I stake it and get the 4% rewards? This way, I could get passive income, something like $10 million USD a year, which is theoretically enough for my family to live a comfortable life. Also, by staking, I would be contributing to the security of the blockchain, which is a big thing for me. I want to do my part. Is this the best course of action for me? I also thought about getting into liquidity pools, but I'm afraid of smart contract risk. What if I put all my ETH into an LP on Solana, and then some asshole comes and drains the contract? I worked very hard for this ETH. That would suck. And there's also the risk of impermanent loss. What if my ETH on Solana decoupled from ETH on mainnet? Anyway, thanks everyone. I look forward to read your ideas.
That's brilliant.
Lovely.
That's brilliant.
Sweet
I
deal.
get a kick-
80,000 Ethereum. Damn.
Yeah.
Get a kick out of you pronouncing it "eth," by the way.
Thanks for everyone's time. I'll see you guys next week.
Alrighty.
Perfect.
Awesome. Take
Sounds
care.
you guys.
good.